History has a way of teaching us the hardest lessons, yet leaders often ignore them. Across centuries, warnings have been shouted from the front lines, the mines, the skies, and the seas, and still, the powerful chose their own voice over survival. Today, we uncover 10 times when listening could have saved lives, empires, or industries, but talking replaced understanding. Stay with me until the end. By the time we finish, you'll see how history whispers warnings we still refuse to hear. Warning 10. Athenian leaders before the Sicilian Expedition, 415 BCE. In the summer of 415 BCE, Athens was riding high on its victories against Sparta. The Democratic Assembly was inflamed with visions of expansion. The Sicilian city of Syracuse appeared ripe for conquest, an opportunity to crush a rival and expand Athenian influence in the West. But warnings came from the generals and seasoned soldiers who had studied the terrain and known the limitations of the Athenian navy. They cautioned that the expedition was too ambitious, the supply lines too stretched, and the morale of the troops too fragile. Yet the leaders, driven by hubris and political pressure, silenced these voices. Assembly debates favored rhetoric over reason, and popular opinion drowned out the practical advice. The result was catastrophic. The expedition ended in disaster. Thousands of soldiers died, the Athenian fleet was destroyed, and Athens' dominance in the Mediterranean faltered. Present-day parallel. In modern corporate boards or political campaigns, visionary projects often override operational realities. Leaders may be seduced by scale, prestige, or the illusion of inevitability, ignoring the voices trained to foresee pitfalls. Think of engineers warning about infrastructure overreach or financial auditors flagging unsustainable investments. Their voices are often sidelined. Lesson: an open-ended warning. History asks, when the chorus of experience clashes with the chorus of ambition, who truly governs the fate of many? Are today's decision-makers listening, or merely speaking? Warning 9. French generals ignoring trench soldiers, World War I, 1914, 2. 1918. World War I is remembered for its muddy trenches, endless artillery, and unimaginable loss of life. Soldiers in the trenches experienced firsthand the changing nature of warfare: machine guns, chemical weapons, and artillery barrages that could annihilate entire units in minutes. Yet their reports, complaints, and tactical insights were often dismissed by generals seated safely behind the lines. At Verdun, at the Somme, and in numerous smaller offensives, generals insisted on outdated strategies. Officers ignored advice from frontline scouts and soldiers who understood the shifting terrain. Entire divisions were sacrificed to meet strategic ambitions that bore little relation to reality. Present-day parallel. This is mirrored today in organizations where feedback from operational teams is ignored in favor of boardroom assumptions. Whether in disaster response or large-scale projects, ignoring those who directly confront challenges often leads to unnecessary loss. Lesson: an open-ended warning. How many crises could be avoided if leaders truly listened? If the present-day hierarchy dismisses the voices closest to danger, are we repeating the mistakes of trenches long abandoned? Warning 8. Qing officials dismissing coastal traders, 17th. 2. 18th century China. During the Qing dynasty, the empire's coastal regions were vibrant hubs of trade, culture, and innovation. Local traders understood tides, pirate threats, and foreign markets. They warned imperial officials about piracy, smuggling, and the economic consequences of isolationist policies. But the mandarins, ensconced in Beijing, preferred edicts over dialogue. Their deafness had consequences. Piracy flourished, coastal economies suffered, and the empire's ability to respond to external threats weakened. When foreign powers arrived decades later with advanced ships and firepower, the Qing coastal defense was ill-prepared, a combination of bureaucratic arrogance and ignored expertise. Present-day parallel. Today, ignoring field data is still common. Governments or corporations often prioritize policy or image over ground-level intelligence, whether in climate change warnings, supply chain issues, or public health crises. Lesson and open-ended warning. When those closest to reality speak, are we brave enough to act, or do we drown in abstract plans that history has already condemned? Warning 7. Ottoman sultans ignoring naval officers, 16th. 2. 17th century. The Ottoman Empire once dominated the Mediterranean. Yet even the greatest empires falter when listening fails. Naval officers repeatedly warned sultans about ship maintenance, logistical issues, and the growing strength of European rivals like Venice and Spain. The empire's court, driven by politics and ceremonial splendor, often dismissed these warnings. The Battle of Lepanto in 1571 highlighted the danger. Ottoman fleets faced catastrophic losses when strategic caution was ignored. Though the empire survived for centuries, repeated negligence at the top accelerated maritime decline. Present-day parallel. Modern militaries and governments sometimes mirror this arrogance, ignoring intelligence reports or frontline advice until crisis forces costly reactions. Lesson and open-ended warning. How many strategic defeats today are quietly being ridden, unnoticed because hierarchy replaces listening with ritualistic affirmation? Warning 6. World War I High Command ignoring scouts. Even within the same war, another level of deaf leadership existed. Reconnaissance scouts and intelligence officers gathered crucial information about enemy positions. Yet in multiple campaigns, their insights were filtered, distorted, or ignored. Orders were issued on assumptions rather than observation. In one tragic example, entire battalions marched into artillery zones already mapped by scouts, resulting in preventable casualties. Present-day parallel. Intelligence failures are not only historical. In disaster management or pandemic responses, ignoring expert warnings leads to amplified consequences. The pattern remains painfully familiar. Lesson and open-ended warning. In a world flooded with data, are we listening to those trained to interpret it, or are we still repeating a deadly pattern of ignoring reality? Warning 5. Vietnam political leadership ignoring local voices, 1960s. 2. 1970s. During the Vietnam War, Local populations and field officers repeatedly attempted to communicate the realities of guerrilla warfare to national leaders in Saigon and Washington. Villagers, regional commanders, and intelligence officers warned about insurgent strategies, local allegiances, and the futility of traditional tactics. Yet the political leadership, consumed by ideology and optics, often dismissed these warnings. Strategies were built around abstract models rather than ground realities. This disconnect contributed to prolonged conflict, massive civilian casualties, and strategic failures that could have been mitigated. Present-day parallel. In modern conflict zones are complex social crises. Leadership that disregards local expertise risks repeating history. From urban planning ignoring community input to foreign policy ignoring on-the-ground intelligence, the pattern persists. Lesson and open-ended warning. How much suffering could be prevented if decision-makers truly listened to those closest to danger? Will future leaders learn, or will they continue speaking over survival? Warning 4. Soviet planners ignoring miners 1930s. 2. 1950s USSR. In the industrial heartlands of the Soviet Union, miners and workers regularly reported unsafe conditions, equipment failures, and resource shortages. These warnings often highlighted potential disasters that could halt production or threaten lives. But the central planners, obsessed with meeting quotas and demonstrating ideological strength, ignored these voices. Catastrophes such as mine collapses and industrial accidents were the predictable results. The human cost was immense, and morale suffered deeply, yet central command rarely adjusted policies. Present-day parallel. Today, organizations that ignore frontline workers face similar consequences. Safety warnings, operational challenges, and risk assessments are often overlooked until tragedy strikes, highlighting a timeless tension between authority and insight. Lesson and open-ended warning. Are we valuing metrics over human experience? How long can leaders ignore the lived reality before history repeats its harsh verdict? Warning 3. Airline disasters from cockpit hierarchy 20th to 21st century. Commercial aviation has witnessed tragic consequences when cockpit hierarchies silence critical voices. In several major airline disasters, co-pilots noticed anomalies, engine failures, or procedural errors, yet the rigid command structure and fear of challenging authority led to fatal inaction. From Tenerife to modern aviation near misses, the lesson is consistent. When listening is replaced by rigid talking, survival is compromised. Protocols and training can mitigate risk, but human behavior under hierarchy remains unpredictable. Present-day parallel. Modern workplaces with strict hierarchies, whether in aviation, nuclear energy, or finance, continue to face this danger. Whistleblowers and junior staff warnings are sometimes ignored until irreversible consequences occur. Lesson and open-ended warning. How often do we elevate rank over insight? And in doing so, how many silent disasters are waiting to unfold? Warning 2. Corporate boardrooms ignoring engineers, 21st century. In the age of technology, warnings from engineers, developers, and technical specialists are frequently dismissed by executives driven by profit, brand image, or political ambition. From software vulnerabilities to infrastructure weaknesses, ignoring internal expertise has led to financial collapses, safety failures, and public scandals. A notable example is the early 2000s corporate scandals, where engineers flagged systemic risks that executives disregarded. Had they listened, major disasters could have been prevented, saving billions and countless livelihoods. Present-day parallel. Even today, AI ethics warnings, cybersecurity alerts, and environmental compliance signals are often sidelined in favor of strategic vision or quarterly targets. The echoes of history remain in boardrooms worldwide. Open-ended warning. Are we still letting ambition speak louder than knowledge? When expert voices are drowned out, survival isn't just jeopardized, it becomes an illusion. Warning 1. Modern governments ignoring scientists, 21st century global crises. The most pressing and recent example is the global neglect of scientific warnings. From climate change to pandemics, experts have repeatedly sounded alarms. Rising sea levels, extreme weather patterns, and viral outbreaks were predicted decades before they demanded urgent action. Yet political leaders, driven by elections, ideology, or short-term gains, often ignored these warnings. The consequences are unfolding before our eyes: environmental degradation, economic instability, and human suffering on an unprecedented scale. Present-day parallel. Beyond natural disasters. This also applies to technological, social, and economic systems where evidence is ignored. Society pays the price when those in power choose to speak rather than listen. Open-ended warning. The ultimate question remains: will humanity learn to prioritize listening over rhetoric before survival itself becomes a test of who truly hears? These 10 warnings span centuries, continents, and systems, from empires and armies to corporations and governments. They remind us that the cost of deaf leadership is measured in lives, opportunities, and the slow unraveling of civilizations. History whispers, the front lines shout, yet leaders too often choose their own voice over survival. The real question is, will we finally learn to listen, or are we doomed to repeat the same mistakes, louder each time,